The day I discovered the truth, it wasn't just my heart that shattered, it was my entire world, rebuilt on a foundation of lies. What would you do if the two people you loved most conspired against you, stealing the one thing you desperately longed for? Before I start, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by your own blood. Here's what happened. My life, for so long, had been a quiet hum of contentment, a tapestry woven with threads of love and simple dreams. I was Sarah, happily married to Mark, my college sweetheart, for nearly 10 years. We lived in a charming, slightly too small house with a garden I adored, in a town where everyone knew everyone. Mark was everything I thought I wanted: kind, steady, a good provider. We shared a comfortable routine, lazy Sunday mornings, and a mutual dream that filled our conversations and our quiet moments: a baby. For years, that dream felt just out of reach. The fertility treatments, the endless appointments, the crushing disappointment each month, they left scars on my soul, but also an unyielding hope. Mark was always there, holding my hand, telling me we'd get through it, that our time would come. He was my rock, my confidant, the only one who truly understood the depth of my longing. Or so I believed. And then there was Emily, my younger sister. Emily, with her wild spirit, her spontaneous choices, and a knack for always landing on her feet, no matter how chaotic her path. We were different, night and day. I was the cautious one, the planner; she was the free bird, living in the moment. Despite our differences, there was an undeniable bond, a shared history that transcended everything. She was my sister, my only sibling, and I loved her fiercely, even when her choices made me anxious. Emily, never one for conventional paths, had a string of complicated relationships. So, when she called me, her voice trembling, to tell me she was pregnant, my first reaction wasn't shock, but a wave of concern mixed with an instinct to protect her. She was barely 22, living paycheck to paycheck, and the father, a fleeting acquaintance, was completely out of the picture. She was scared, overwhelmed, and completely alone. "I don't know what I'm going to do, Sarah," she'd cried, her voice muffled by tears. I can't raise a baby right now. I can barely take care of myself." My heart ached for her. I rushed to her tiny, cluttered apartment, bringing her food, listening to her fears, offering whatever comfort I could. Mark, ever the supportive husband, encouraged me. "She's your sister, Sarah. She needs you now more than ever." He was so understanding, so empathetic. He even offered to help financially, saying, "Family helps family." Over the next few months, I became Emily's constant companion. I went to her doctor's appointments, helped her navigate the maze of prenatal care, and listened patiently as she wrestled with the impossible decision of what to do after the baby was born. She spoke about adoption, about not being ready, about wanting a better life for her child than she could provide. Each conversation was a knife in my heart, a painful echo of my own unfulfilled desire. I longed for a baby so desperately, and here was my sister, contemplating giving hers away. The irony was a cruel twist of fate. I remember one particularly difficult evening. Emily was well into her 3rd trimester, exhausted and visibly distressed. We were sitting in her small living room, the air thick with unspoken anxieties. Mark had come over with dinner, trying to lighten the mood. Emily, in a moment of raw vulnerability, looked at us, her eyes red-rimmed. "Sometimes," she whispered, I wish you two could just take the baby. You want one so badly, and I just can't." My breath hitched. Mark, ever so gently, put a hand on her arm. "Emily," he said, his voice soft, "we love you, and will support whatever decision you make. You have to do what's best for you and the baby." He was so calm, so reassuring. He didn't dismiss her idea outright, but he didn't jump on it either. He was simply understanding. I didn't realize then that this was just a prelude to a much darker story. The weeks leading up to Emily's due date were a blur of nervous anticipation. Emily was growing more agitated, more withdrawn. She rarely talked about the baby, often changing the subject when I brought it up. I attributed it to her fear, her overwhelmed state. I saw her less and less, which was strange, considering how close we'd been during her pregnancy. She'd say she was resting, or didn't feel well enough for visitors. Mark, too, seemed unusually busy, often working late, or so he said. There was a subtle shift in our routine, a quiet detachment that I brushed off as pre-baby jitters on Emily's part, and work stress on Mark's. I remember the day Emily called to say she was in labor. My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and trepidation. I rushed to the hospital, but when I got there, Emily was already in a private room, her face pale, the delivery complete. "It was fast, Sarah," she said, her voice weak. "A boy." She smiled faintly, but there was a guarded look in her eyes, a kind of weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He's already gone to his new family." My stomach dropped. So quickly? She had decided on adoption, of course, but the speed of it, the lack of any goodbye, felt wrong. "Did you even get to hold him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked away. Just for a moment. Her eyes were distant, as if she was trying to recall a dream that was already fading. "They seemed like good people, Sarah. Really good." I wanted to ask more, to understand, but she seemed so fragile, so vulnerable. I didn't push. I focused on her recovery, on bringing her home, on helping her heal. Mark was there too, supportive as ever, visiting Emily, bringing her flowers. He seemed to handle the news with a quiet solemnity, often mentioning how selfless Emily was, how strong. He was so reassuring, holding me close as I wrestled with the bittersweet ache of knowing a baby had come into our family, only to leave so quickly. I told myself it was for the best, for Emily, for the baby. I clung to Mark's comforting presence, his steady love, as my anchor. But small cracks began to appear in the smooth surface of our lives, subtle at first, barely perceptible. Mark started taking more business trips, or so he claimed. He'd be gone for days, sometimes a week. He'd always been dedicated to his work, but this felt different. His calls became shorter, his explanations vague. He'd come home looking tired, distant, his eyes holding a look I couldn't quite decipher. I'd ask him about his trips, about his meetings, and he'd give generic answers, then quickly change the subject. A tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered that something was off, but I pushed it down, attributing it to my own anxieties and the lingering sadness from Emily's adoption. Then there were the subtle changes in Emily. She seemed to bounce back remarkably fast, almost too fast. The deep sadness I expected, the processing of giving up a child, it seemed to be absent. Instead, she had an almost manic energy, a newfound cheerfulness that felt forced. She'd suddenly have money for things she never could afford, new clothes, little luxuries. When I asked, she'd simply say, "Oh, I got a new gig," or, "just good budgeting." I dismissed it, thinking maybe she was just relieved, trying to move on. The biggest crack, though, was the baby supplies. Not long after Emily's delivery, I started noticing things around our house. A small, plush blanket I didn't recognize, tucked away in the back of a closet. A baby book, half-filled, hidden beneath a pile of old magazines in Mark's study. A tiny, silver rattle that I accidentally knocked out from under the couch while cleaning. Each discovery was a cold prickle on my skin, a surge of confusion. When I asked Mark about them, he'd quickly brush it off. "Oh, those? Just some old things I picked up at a garage sale, thought they might be useful someday for, if we ever adopt." He'd smile, a little too brightly, and change the subject. I wanted to believe him, I truly did. My mind fought against the growing unease, desperately clinging to the image of my honest, loving husband. I didn't realize then that these were not just cracks, but gaping chasms. One afternoon, months after Emily's baby was born, I was cleaning out some old files in Mark's home office. He was on one of his business trips. I stumbled upon a box marked "Financials, Old." Inside, beneath a stack of dated tax returns, was a thick folder. Its contents chilled me to the bone. Bank statements showing large, consistent transfers to an unknown account, labeled only with initials. Receipts from baby stores I'd never visited, for expensive items, a high-end stroller, a state-of-the-art crib, countless newborn clothes. And then, at the very bottom, a crumpled piece of paper. It was a birth certificate. The name on the certificate was Liam. The mother was listed as Emily Jane Miller. And the father was Mark Andrew Davis. My breath hitched. The blood drained from my face, leaving me lightheaded, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped the papers. Liam. Emily. Mark. It couldn't be. This had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. But the dates, the names, the cold, stark reality of the documents screamed otherwise. My husband. My sister. A baby. Their baby. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet unease I'd felt, the small cracks I'd dismissed, they weren't just signs, they were glaring, blinding truths. The business trips, the strange cheerfulness from Emily, the hidden baby items, it all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening precision. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Emily had given birth, yes, but she'd said she adopted him out. Adopted him out to us? To Mark? Without me knowing? I remember the feeling of absolute, utter desolation. It was like a physical blow to the chest, leaving me breathless, my heart hammering against my ribs. Betrayal. It wasn't just a word, it was a living, breathing entity, coiling itself around my throat, suffocating me. The love I had for Mark, the trust, the shared dreams, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a searing pain and a bitter, acidic taste in my mouth. I sat there, numb, for what felt like hours, clutching the birth certificate as if it were the only solid thing left in a world that had suddenly become liquid. My husband. My sister. They had done this. Together. Behind my back. And the baby I had longed for, the baby I had mourned the loss of, was actually here. In our lives. But he was hers. And his. The emotional chaos that followed was a storm I never knew I could weather. Heartbreak, so profound it felt like my chest was being ripped open. Anger, a hot, venomous rage that pulsed through my veins. Shame, for being so blind, so naive, so utterly fooled. And silence. A deafening, echoing silence in my own home, a silence that magnified the screams in my head. I didn't confront Mark immediately. I couldn't. I needed to breathe, to think, to grasp the full extent of the deception. The days that followed were a blur of pretending, of smiling weakly when he called from his business trip, of nodding vaguely as he spoke. I walked through our house, the house we had built our dreams in, and saw only lies. Every object, every shared memory, was tainted. The baby's rattle, the blanket, they weren't just random items anymore. They were evidence of a secret life, a betrayal so deep it felt like a violation of my very being. I felt a profound sense of isolation. Who could I talk to? My parents? They adored Mark. My friends? They saw us as the perfect couple. The shame kept me trapped, a prisoner in my own mind, replaying every moment, every kind word Mark had ever said, every plea from Emily, searching for clues I had missed. And they were everywhere, woven into the fabric of our lives, hidden in plain sight. My inability to conceive, my desperate longing for a child, they had exploited it, twisted it into their dark secret. And that's when I realized, they never loved me the way I loved them. What came after was a raw, visceral struggle for survival. I didn't want revenge in the theatrical sense, not at first. I needed truth. I needed to understand why. And then, once I understood, I needed peace. And peace, I realized, wouldn't come without justice. The day Mark returned from his trip, I was waiting. The house was quiet, the air thick with unspoken tension. He walked in, smiling his usual tired smile, pulling me into a hug. I felt nothing but a cold void where my love used to be. "How was your trip, honey?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He launched into his usual vague answers, about client meetings and long flights. I let him finish, watching his eyes, searching for any flicker of remorse, any sign of the man I thought I knew. There was none. Just the practiced nonchalance of a skilled liar. Then, I pulled out the birth certificate. I laid it on the kitchen counter, between us, like a bomb. His eyes widened, his smile faltered, and the color drained from his face. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "What is this, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, but laced with an ice I didn't know I possessed. "Who is Liam? And why is Emily listed as his mother, and you as his father?" The confession, when it came, was a torrent of pathetic excuses and desperate pleas. He stammered, he begged, he tried to spin a tale of Emily being desperate, of him, helping her out, of it being, for us, a way to give me the child I wanted without the complications of adoption. He even tried to twist it into a story of selflessness, of him making a sacrifice for my happiness. He never once looked me in the eye. He told me Emily was scared, that she didn't want the baby, but she also didn't want to give him to strangers. And he, Mark, in his infinite compassion, stepped in. He offered to adopt Liam, knowing my desperation. He orchestrated the entire charade, convincing Emily to go along with it, promising her financial support and a new life. He would register himself as the father, making it look like a private adoption, while I remained oblivious, thinking the baby had gone to a completely different family. He painted it as a secret gift, a benevolent act, an attempt to spare me further heartache from fertility struggles. He claimed they were going to slowly integrate Liam into our lives, eventually telling me the truth when the time was right. His words were a fresh wave of nausea. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had actively manipulated my deepest pain, my most vulnerable dream, turning it into a grotesque secret. He had stolen my chance to be a mother, on my terms, with my consent, and replaced it with a monstrous lie. "And Emily?" I asked, cutting him off, my voice sharp with fury. "My sister. The one I held, the one I comforted, the one I loved. She was in on this? She let me believe that lie? She let you do this?" He mumbled something about Emily being in a tough spot, about her trusting him. The anger that surged through me was volcanic. My own sister. The one who had sworn allegiance, who had shared secrets, who I would have done anything for. She had chosen his lie over my truth. The confrontation with Emily was even more devastating. She arrived at our house, looking pale and nervous, after Mark called her. She tried to deny it at first, then dissolved into tears, babbling about how Mark had convinced her, how she was scared, how she thought it was the best solution. She had received regular payments from Mark, a steady flow of money that explained her sudden comfort. She had chosen money and an easy out over her own sister's peace. "He said you wouldn't be hurt, Sarah," she sobbed. "He said you'd eventually understand, that you'd love Liam anyway, and it would be like he was always meant to be yours." I stared at her, my heart breaking all over again. Her words, so self-serving, so devoid of true remorse, were another betrayal. She saw me not as a sister, but as a problem to be managed, a convenient cover for her own choices. The days that followed were a blur of legal consultations, of emotional breakdowns, of trying to untangle the knotted mess of lies they had woven. The truth about Liam was agonizing. He was indeed Emily's son, and Mark had legally adopted him, but the adoption was a private agreement, carefully hidden from me. Liam was with a foster family now, placed there by Mark and Emily, a temporary arrangement until they figured out their next step. They were preparing to take him back, to raise him as their child, while keeping me completely out of the picture. The idea that this child, born of my sister and husband, was living somewhere, a secret, while I longed for a baby of my own, was a torment. I didn't want revenge that would destroy Liam's life. He was innocent. He was the only victim in this twisted tale who deserved unconditional love and protection. My revenge needed to be about justice for me, about reclaiming my life and my dignity. I filed for divorce from Mark, citing fraud and emotional abuse. It was a messy, public affair, but I didn't care anymore. The shame had burned away, replaced by a fierce determination to expose their lies. I presented all the evidence, the birth certificate, the bank statements, the hidden baby items. The world I had known crumbled, but it also became clear. Many of our mutual friends were shocked, some supportive, others distant. I learned quickly who truly stood by me. As for Emily, I cut ties. Completely. It was the hardest decision, like amputating a part of myself. But I couldn't have her in my life, knowing the depth of her deception. She was no longer my sister, she was a stranger who had collaborated in my destruction. She tried to reach out, to apologize, but her words rang hollow, lacking the genuine anguish of true repentance. The journey to healing was long and arduous. Therapy became my lifeline, helping me process the trauma, the betrayal, the grief. I learned to forgive myself for being so trusting, for loving so completely that I couldn't see the darkness lurking beneath the surface. I rebuilt my life, piece by piece, focusing on my career, on new friendships, on rediscovering who I was outside of being Mark's wife or Emily's sister. I didn't want revenge. I needed peace. And that peace began to bloom when I accepted that my story wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was about standing up for myself, about finding my voice, about reclaiming my narrative. It was about accepting that some losses are so profound they reshape you, but they don't have to destroy you. I learned that strength isn't about not falling, but about rising again, even when your knees are shaking. I found power in my vulnerability, in sharing my story, not to gain sympathy, but to assert my truth. The weight of their secret had almost crushed me, but in exposing it, I found an incredible lightness. I thought losing them would destroy me, but it made me who I am. Family isn't who shares your blood, it's who protects your heart.